All right. So as we continue talking about the New Deal and FDR's response, there's a couple things we want to quickly go over, which is FDR is widely considered to be one of the greatest presidents we've ever had. Some would even say he was the greatest, certainly in the conversation, right? But it doesn't mean that he didn't face people challenging him at the time and trying to undermine his authority. And so I want to talk about that and a couple other things before we move on. All right. So things you'll need for today. All right, you'll need the challenges in New Deal handout so you can take your notes. And then the other thing we're going to talk about today is FDR's work to redefine the environment and try to assist people living in really terrible poverty in rural America. All right, let's go. So there are several key figures who began to openly challenge the president. First one is the name Father Coughlin. Father Coughlin, just a little bit of background on him. He was a Catholic priest who hosted this weekly sermon radio show where he would basically talk to millions of people. It started off for him as just this kind of place during the Great Depression to kind of just practice and talk to people. And he did, it's odd. He actually, some of his earliest radio shows were about, trying to, I don't know, teach small children about Christianity or Catholicism. But here's the thing, once he starts talking about politics, he begins to gain a following. And like I said, by the end, by the time he reaches peak of his popularity, he had 40 million people tuning in. Now, why? All right, in the middle of the Great Depression, people were looking for hope. And here was a guy who was kind of giving them a message. Now, the thing I want to stress about Father Coughlin is that he starts off as a advocate and ally of FDR. As it says in here, he looked at the New Deal and said it was Christ's deal. So when FDR is running for president in 1932, Coughlin is one of his loudest supporters. He is advocating for him on his hugely popular radio show. And the reality is, he does actually play a significant part in getting him elected. Now, that's what he did before. Now, when I say efforts, what I mean by that is what does he do to start to undermine FDR and begin to attack him? So here's the thing, he felt FDR became too pro capitalist. If you look at a lot of the New Deal policies that he put into place, FDR didn't hammer companies, didn't hammer banks as much as people probably would have thought he could have. And here's the reason why, and it's actually kind of smart. In the end, the number one problem the country is facing is you have too many people without jobs. If you hammer the banks and industries too much, they won't be able to hire anybody. He understood he needed them. The government, the CCC and the WPA can't hire everybody. So ultimately, you need private investment and private companies to pick up the slack. And so when FDR doesn't punish them or go after them, Coughlin begins to turn on him. Um, Now, he does a couple different things. One, he'll have a magazine called Social Justice. It became incredibly popular, as you might imagine. The problem with Father Coughlin was not only was he attacking FDR, who was an incredibly popular figure in America, he also went after communists, which no one really cared. He went after wealthy bankers, which again, I think most people were probably good with. But then he also was one of the loudest voices for pushing anti-Semitic stereotypes and anti-Semitic theories about the Depression. Not that we want to spend a lot of time here talking about this, but it's been a widely held belief among certain circles in America, and certainly during this time in history, the circle was quite wide, considering the KKK was incredibly popular in the 1920s. That Jews run the country, run the world's economy, and all these things. So he's spouting all these theories. Kind of an unintended consequence, or maybe an intended consequence, is when the Holocaust begins and the U.S. Is asked to kind of, if we're willing to help, Father Coughlin's voice is very loud and he's incredibly influential. So he's not the main reason, but he definitely played a part in the reason we didn't do much to assist Jews attempting to escape persecution. He actually, of course, creates an organization and works with a couple of the other people who we're going to talk about in a second. He organized a political party and even ran as a candidate in 1936. Didn't get a lot of votes, but he still ran as a candidate in 1936 to challenge FDR. So again, this is somebody who's on the far left of FDR attacking him. Next major figure is Huey Long. Huey Long is this notorious American, um, to some a villain, to some a hero. He is from Louisiana. He was both their governor and a senator. He was an incredibly popular governor. There are story after story about the way he ran the state as a governor. He was essentially running as a dictatorship. If you didn't agree with him, if you challenged him, he would find a way to crush you. That's going to come back to bite him in a little bit. We'll get there. All right. So, what kind of stuff is he doing in Louisiana? So, he's increased taxes on corporations. He specifically really hated the oil company. Um, and Louisiana had a good sized oil business. And so he would really hammer them. He lowered utility costs for the poor. He built hospitals and schools. Um, Essentially, I think the number is about 40% of Louisiana didn't have paved roads. And so he starts doing these huge public works projects in the 1920s, right? This is before the Great Depression, to start to modernize Louisiana. He helped build their state capital. The thing that I don't know, maybe because, as you know, I tend to look down on the South. Um, when he became governor, the literacy rate in Louisiana was 25%. 25%. Uh, yeah. So one of the things he did was, besides giving more funding to schools, he created a literacy program for adults. And was able to educate 200,000 adults in literacy by the time he left the governorship. Now, after that, he will then become a senator. He'll serve as a single term as senator. And again, he was a huge supporter and advocate for FDR. The issue was he felt like FDR didn't go far enough. He creates the thing, as it says here, the Share Our Wealth Society, which basically goal was to listen. Let's call it what it is. It's basically socialism. The thing that should probably stick out at you as number one is he wanted 100% tax on any income over $1 million. So if you made $2 million or $4 million in a year, which we're talking basically nobody at that time in history, but if that's how much money you're making, anything past that $1 million, you don't get to keep any of it. And so what he would then begin to do is then use that to literally redistribute with like money and cash and programs to the poor of America. Again, he wanted to break up generational wealth. Anything over $5 million in inheritance would be taxed at 100%. So, you know, he's, he's kind of like the Bernie Sanders, right? Of a very different time period. He wanted to nationalize banks, utilities. So some of these ideas are crazy radical. Some of them are not new. They go back to the Populist Party. Is that the free silver and the banks and you nationalizing banks and utilities? Now, unfortunately for Huey Long, it does not end well for him. He announced he was going to run for president. Within about 2 months, he got himself assassinated. Now, there was this famous family in Louisiana that he, for whatever reason, just hated, just picked on him nonstop. He went back and chaired this committee in Louisiana, which basically removed this father-in-law or son-in-law of this family as a judge. And out of anger and frustration, the member of the family walked into his office and shot him. Um, he didn't recover from these wounds. He died shortly thereafter, and so he never really got to mount that serious challenge to FDR. But just as a weird side note, the bodyguards who fired back at the assassin, yeah, they didn't hold back. They fired 61 times. So I think they got him. Yeah. All right, next guy, Dr. Francis Townsend. All right, so here's why I like Dr. Francis Townsend. Bro sucked. He was a doctor. He had worked in the military for a while, but he wasn't a very good businessman. And so like he tried to open up a doctor's office in California, Long Beach, and it went under. He couldn't make it work. So then he decides, all right, I need a paycheck. So he will then go take a job with the city, basically working as, in the health department of the city. Well, that's okay, but then the Great Depression hits, revenue for communities and cities plummets. He's the assistant, not the actual city health director. So he gets fired. And so suddenly at the age of 66, he has no job, he has no savings, he has nothing. So he begins to advocate for something that becomes ultimately Social Security, right? He will work with Long and Coughlin before Long gets killed. But some of the things he wanted to do that were a little more radical. He wanted to nationalize all the banks. So that would basically mean there wouldn't be private banks any longer. There would just be a single bank run by the government. Why? Well, if the banks collapsed, that was part of the reason of the Great Depression. This would prevent that from ever happening again. Now, the thing you want to remember, the thing that's most important is this stuff down here. He wanted to essentially become Social Security. He wanted to create a pension that would be given to every elderly person, about $200 a month. All right, that would have been a really nice check at the time. And so before you think that sounds crazy, keep in mind we have Social Security now. I talked about it before, but he had some stipulations in there, and there's logic here too. So first of all, if you give older people a guaranteed check a month, what they'll do is they'll say, you know what, I don't need to work. I'll take that check, and suddenly their jobs open up for someone younger. Pretty smart. That makes sense. Number two, um, he basically would say you had to spend all of the money you were given within 30 days. So this is direct cash in the hands of a population that has no other income and needs to spend it to basically pay the bills. All right. So the deal is this, right? If you make them have to spend it, that means they're going to buy things. That means you're going to increase the demand and all again. So you're going to stimulate the economy. And then, oddly enough, he said you could not have criminal habits and get the pension. So I guess they didn't want people who were known for fraud or other crimes getting the money. But again, as it says here, he had an incredibly large following. And in the end, he gets what he wants. Social Study will be created in large part because this gentleman pushed it. So these are challenges to FDR from the left. Let's keep going here. I'm going to go real fast. All right. Court packing scandal. All right, I'm just going to summarize this. You guys can pause and get more detailed notes. Basically, when Roosevelt wins election in 1936, he basically began to think he could do whatever he wanted. He won an unbelievable sweeping victory. So the problem was several of FDR's key New Deal projects and things got shot down by the Supreme Court saying they were unconstitutional. So he comes up with a solution. His solution is let's increase the size of the Supreme Court and I will pack it full of people who agree with me. So therefore, if half the court is conservative and wants to strike down what I'm doing, I'll just up the number with more liberal people or more democratic people. And then so they won't go after and attack any of my ideas. All right, here's the thing. That does not, this no, Congress has wants no part of this whatsoever. All right. And so he will get rejected. Now, there's two famous cases that basically bring about this. There's the Schechter Poultry versus U.S., which basically said that the government had no right to control in-state trade. Remember, they're only responsible for dealing with trade between states. And the other thing that they objected to was he created a tax to help pay for the AAA. And because that was basically money being given to farmers to not grow, it was basically viewed as a special interest group getting the things they needed and not benefiting the general public. All right, well, I'm looking at the time here. I know I can't cover the last little bit in 2 minutes, so I'll go ahead and call this video and then I'll add another video on really quickly to talk about the environmental stuff. So make sure you keep that sheet in front of you.